I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The judgment was only a few pages long, but its meaning struck like a hammer. A high court ruling had severed Tom Parker Bowles from any legal standing in the Queen's private trust, closing a door that some inside royal circles believed had remained deliberately unresolved for years. Camilla received the news behind palace walls. Charles heard moments later. And before anyone could control the consequences, one devastating question had already begun spreading through the monarchy. What had the court discovered? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move when the decisive paragraph was placed before her. She read it once, then again, her fingers tightening around the pages before she finally looked toward the aide across from her. "Does this mean there is nothing left to challenge?" she asked. The Queen's private trust, a fictional legal arrangement controlling personal assets, heirlooms, heir, correspondence, and family provisions outside ordinary crown property, had become the center of a deeply personal defeat. The High Court had ruled plainly that Tom possessed no beneficiary authority, no enforceable claim, and no legal standing inside it. Tom reacted without fury at first. He stared at his solicitor and asked him to read the final sentence aloud, as though hearing those words might reveal some forgotten exception. It did not. The documented court judgment rejected the argument presented on his behalf and went further, stressing that Camilla's position created no legal bridge between the trust and her children. That distinction mattered because royal proximity could carry enormous public symbolism while creating absolutely no private entitlement. For Tom, that difference suddenly felt brutal. Charles received the same news in his study and slowly placed his pen beside the briefing papers. The king said nothing for several seconds. He understood that the High Court, the senior court handling major civil disputes in this dramatized account, had not simply rejected one interpretation. It had reinforced a boundary between marriage and inheritance that could affect how Camilla understood her own family's place beside the crown. The official opposite him waited, realizing that the monarch was absorbing the emotional damage before discussing legal strategy. Palace counsel then found the detail that changed everything. One clause had appeared repeatedly throughout the documented judgment, and its wording had been written years before Camilla became queen. It blocked later family relationships from expanding the original circle of beneficiaries. Charles recognized its significance immediately. Camilla would soon discover that the language had not appeared by accident. The judgment had closed Tom's legal path in minutes, but the clause pointed backward toward something far more painful, an uncomfortable meeting involving the late queen, a private request, and the moment this entire crisis was truly set in motion. For the public, the ruling looked like law. For Camilla, it was family. For Tom, it was a rejection carrying the weight of a royal institution he had spent most of his life standing beside, but never truly inside. And for Charles, the judgment created an impossible division between husband and sovereign. Whatever happened next could not be solved by affection alone, because the court had drawn a boundary that even the king could not simply erase. Camilla met Tom privately only hours after the judgment. No aides stood nearby, and no palace official tried to soften the language. Tom Parker Bowles, her son and one of the people closest to her personally, placed the ruling on a side table and looked directly at his mother. He told her he had never expected to be treated as royal. He had never asked for that. But he had expected the legal process to hear his argument differently. The distinction mattered because being connected to the sovereign's household could create closeness and access, while legal standing meant something far stricter, a recognized right to make a claim within the trust. Camilla tried to answer as a mother before answering as queen. She told him his place in her life had never depended on a document, a title, or the approval of any court. Tom listened, then gave the response she had been dreading. The document, he said quietly, was exactly what everyone else would now use to define where he stood. Her defensiveness disappeared almost instantly. What remained was pain, because she understood that this was no longer only about money, possessions, or access. It was about belonging. Charles felt the pressure from another direction. The king sympathized with his wife, but he also understood that interfering with a private trust could make the crown appear willing to rewrite legal rules for family convenience. A private trust, in simple terms, is an arrangement that holds and manages assets according to fixed instructions, rather than personal wishes made later. If he pushed against those instructions now, the entire dispute could become larger than Tom. Tom's legal team had never pursued a simple inheritance claim. Their documented argument focused on interpretation, whether Camilla's later position as queen created derivative rights, meaning rights that might flow through another person's legal status, connected to provisions intended for the sovereign's immediate household. Months earlier, palace lawyers had warned privately that this argument was weak because the trust contained unusually restrictive wording against expansion through remarriage or later titles. Charles then learned something that cut deeper. Camilla had understood that risk and still allowed the challenge to continue. To withdraw, she believed, would have meant accepting that her children could stand near the royal family forever, without ever standing inside its private structure. But that fear had not begun with the High Court. Years earlier, one request involving Tom and access to the trust had reached the late Queen, and her response would become the true beginning of everything that followed. Every family crisis has a moment that looks ordinary, until history gives it meaning. In this story, that moment came years before the courtroom battle, when a request concerning Tom Parker Bowles reached Queen Elizabeth II during a private discussion over future family arrangements. Nothing exploded that day. No confrontation reached the public. Yet the monarch's reaction was decisive. A clause was strengthened, instructions were written, and from that moment forward, one legal boundary became almost impossible to cross. Elizabeth had always guarded the structure of her private trust with unusual care. The arrangement was built around a limited circle of beneficiaries and custodians, meaning the named people allowed to receive benefits or manage certain assets under its rules. Marriage, divorce, remarriage, or a later royal title could not automatically widen that circle. That mattered because personal heirlooms, correspondence, and privately held property were separate from crown assets controlled for the monarchy itself. One belonged to the institution, the other remained deeply personal. Charles and Camilla eventually forced that distinction into uncomfortable territory. As their marriage became settled and her position grew stronger, questions emerged about how her children would be treated around private family arrangements. Tom remained outside the royal bloodline, but he was also the son of the woman standing beside the future king. That tension finally reached Windsor during one private meeting that would later become impossible to ignore. Elizabeth listened as an advisor raised a specific request. Tom Parker Bowles, he suggested, might receive limited future access to certain trust records and discretionary benefits because his mother had become central to Charles's household. The Queen allowed him to finish. Then she closed the folder in front of her and delivered the sentence later preserved in a documented private account. The trust must never become a ladder created by marriage. She immediately instructed her private secretary to seek stronger legal wording, blocking future spouses or their children from gaining rights indirectly. Camilla learned about the change later, and the knowledge wounded her badly. She did not simply hear that Tom had been excluded. She heard a permanent distinction between the Windsor line and her own family. Charles tried to calm her, explaining that his mother had always separated private affection from legal boundaries. The king reminded her that Elizabeth could care deeply for someone without granting that person rights over property she intended for a narrow line. Camilla answered with a sentence he never forgot. "Boundaries," she said, "stop feeling constitutional when they are written around the people you love." Lawyers later called the strengthened language the closed line provision, a clause allowing rights to pass only to specifically named people or tightly defined descendants. No later marriage could open it. Now the High Court had relied on that exact wording. Elizabeth's decision had survived her death, crossed the years, and landed directly inside Tom's case. For years, the clause had remained ink on paper. Now it had become a verdict, and Camilla's restraint was about to break against the one person who had always understood what it truly meant. Camilla did not confront the judges. She confronted Charles. Within hours of the ruling, the Queen walked into a private room carrying the judgment and placed it directly before the king. Years of compromise suddenly narrowed to one accusation. He had understood the late Queen's restrictions better than anyone, yet he had never persuaded Camilla to abandon the challenge. What followed was not a constitutional dispute. It was a marriage colliding with the monarchy. Camilla entered Charles's private sitting room without waiting for the usual formalities. She placed the court papers beside him and asked the question that had been building since the judgment arrived. Did you always think Tom would lose? The king looked at the pages before answering. He admitted that the legal argument had faced serious obstacles from the beginning. His measured tone only made matters worse. She did not want the monarch speaking carefully. She wanted her husband telling her why he had allowed the fight to continue. Charles tried to hold the line. He explained that any intervention from him could have looked like pressure from the crown, meaning the institution surrounding the sovereign and the authority attached to it, against an independent legal process. Camilla heard the explanation, but rejected the comfort behind it. She accused him of watching her family walk toward defeat, while palace officials quietly prepared for exactly that outcome. He answered that protecting the court from royal influence had mattered more than protecting them from disappointment. Camilla's anger finally cracked into something deeper. She told him the monarchy had spent years asking her to accept boundaries for the sake of stability. She had accepted ceremonies, limits, comparisons, and old wounds. But this time, her son stood outside the line. Charles recoiled slightly, yet he did not interrupt. He understood that she was no longer arguing about legal standing. She was asking whether belonging to him had ever truly brought her children closer to the family he represented. Charles then disclosed what Palace Council had prepared before Judgment Day. 2 contingency responses existed, one for a limited victory and another for complete defeat. The second statement was already nearly finished. He also admitted that an advisor had proposed creating a separate private arrangement that could indirectly soften Tom's loss. The king had refused. Circumventing Elizabeth's restrictions, he believed, would turn one painful judgment into a far greater scandal. Camilla stared at him and finally understood. He would not overturn the trust. He would not dilute it. And he would not invent another route simply to spare her pain. She gathered the papers and asked one final question. Then who actually has the power now? Charles answered quietly. The trustees. That word changed the argument completely. The trustees were not ceremonial caretakers, but legally responsible guardians required to enforce the trust exactly as written. And one of them was holding a document that could end this dispute for good. Royal titles can command rooms, but private trusts answer to documents. The judgment suddenly pushed a group of largely invisible trustees into the center of the crisis, because they possessed something neither Charles nor Camilla could manufacture: fiduciary authority. And among their papers sat a sealed memorandum signed years earlier, spelling out exactly how the late Queen expected them to respond if anyone attempted to extend the trust through a later marriage. William heard the explanation in a private briefing and immediately understood why the situation had become more dangerous. The trustees were not palace servants waiting for royal instructions. They carried fiduciary authority, meaning a legal duty to protect the trust and follow its written terms for the people it was created to serve. Their responsibility was not to keep Camilla comfortable or make Charles's private life easier. It was to enforce the document, even when doing so caused pain inside the family. The prince listened as one senior trustee opened a locked file and removed a memorandum bearing Elizabeth's instructions. He placed it beside the High Court judgment and allowed the wording to speak for itself. William felt the tension sharpen. The same principle appeared in both documents. No person could gain entitlement through the later elevation, marriage, or title of another beneficiary unless the trust's own mechanism had specifically added them. The future king knew what that meant. Tom's problem was no longer a matter of interpretation alone. Charles received the next part with even greater difficulty. The trustee explained that the amendment procedure, the formal process used to change who could benefit under the trust, had effectively closed for certain protected categories after Elizabeth's death. The king could not simply add Tom. Camilla could not request a new exception. Even sympathy from the sovereign could not rewrite instructions deliberately designed to survive the person who created them. William asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Was there any lawful discretion left? The trustee answered carefully. Personal gifts could still be made outside the trust, and family relationships could continue exactly as before, but legal standing within the arrangement was finished, unless a separate judicial appeal overturned the court's interpretation. The prince accepted the answer, though uneasily. Strict enforcement protected continuity, but he knew it could deepen the fracture between his father and the queen. Charles felt that contradiction most painfully. His mother had built a structure strong enough to resist even her successor. Part of him saw distrust in that choice. Another part recognized discipline. Elizabeth had made sure future emotion could not undo her final instructions. Camilla received the trustees' formal explanation without protest. She listened until Tom's name was repeated as a legal category, then interrupted quietly. "Please stop speaking about my son as though he is only a line in a document." Her dignity held. But by sunrise, the documents would become consequences. And Tom was about to discover exactly what no standing meant. The most painful consequences were not grand. They were administrative. A canceled briefing, a revoked authorization, a name removed from correspondence. By the next morning, Tom Parker Bowles understood that legal language becomes real through small acts performed by people following instructions. The ruling did not strip him of family. It stripped him of a position he had hoped the court might recognize, and the first visible sign arrived in an envelope bearing no warmth at all. Tom opened the letter alone and immediately understood what had changed. The trustees had suspended every pending request made under his disputed standing and ordered future communication to treat him only as an outside interested party. That phrase carried a cold meaning. He could ask questions, but he no longer had any recognized position from which to demand answers. A private briefing connected to trust-held family material was canceled as well, proving that the judgment was no longer symbolic. It was now controlling access. Tom folded the letter once and called Camilla. When the Queen answered, he did not accuse her, complain about the court, or speak about humiliation. "It's done," he said quietly. She understood immediately. Her guilt surfaced before he could say anything more. She told him she had genuinely believed her marriage to Charles might create a unique legal position the judges would recognize. Her son let the silence sit for a moment, then answered with painful simplicity. Belief and law, he said, had finally become two different things. Camilla tried to apologize, but Tom stopped her. His lawyers had already advised against rushing into an appeal, a formal request asking a higher court to reconsider the ruling. The judgment did not depend on one technical weakness that could easily be challenged. Several separate trust provisions supported the same conclusion, making reversal far more difficult. Worse, another legal fight could force additional private documents into scrutiny. He had no desire to expose family correspondence, merely to continue a battle that was already costing them more than access. Charles reached out soon afterward through a private message. The king offered to speak whenever Tom was ready, but the invitation created another hesitation. He could not decide whether he would be meeting the man married to his mother or the sovereign whose institution had just reinforced the boundary against him. So he waited. William saw the danger in that silence. During a private conversation with his father, the prince warned that prolonging the dispute could transform a painful family disagreement into a constitutional spectacle. Charles knew he was right. Yet accepting that truth meant asking Camilla to let go of the fight she had pursued for her son. Tom removed that burden before either of them could act. He contacted Charles himself and requested one meeting. No lawyers, no advisors, no palace machinery between them. The court had spoken, and the trustees had acted. Now two men would decide whether the damage remained legal or became personal. Tom did not ask Charles for intervention. He asked him for honesty. The meeting took place privately, with no lawyers in the room and no aide waiting at the table. One man was the king. The other was the son of the woman he loved. Yet for nearly an hour, they spoke without titles. By the end, the legal dispute had not changed at all, but the emotional direction of the entire crisis had. Tom entered Charles's private study, declined the offer of tea, and placed his copy of the judgment on the table between them. The king looked at the pages for a moment, then moved them aside. The gesture mattered. He did not want the conversation governed by clauses or court language. An appeal, a formal request asking a higher court to reconsider a judgment was still technically possible, but Tom had already decided he would not pursue one. Tom told Charles he refused to turn his mother's marriage into a legal argument that could follow the family for years. He had seen what the case had already done to Camilla. Every new filing would keep her trapped between defending her son and defending her place beside the monarch. He would not allow that. The decision cost him any remaining legal hope, but it gave him something the case had slowly taken away: control. Charles answered carefully at first. He said he regretted the humiliation created by the ruling and wished the dispute had never reached this point. The king also made one thing clear: even if intervention had been available, he would not have pressured the trustees or attempted to influence the court. Tom surprised him by nodding. That, he said, was exactly why he had come. Tom did not want compensation disguised as kindness. He asked Charles not to create another privilege, another private route, or another arrangement designed to make the defeat disappear. Doing so would only suggest that the rules mattered until they became painful. The king understood. For the first time since the crisis began, both men were speaking about dignity rather than access. Charles then asked what Tom actually needed from him. The answer came without hesitation: protect Camilla. She had been preparing herself for another challenge because she believed her son would keep fighting. Tom wanted the king to make sure she did not mistake the judgment for a verdict on her own worth inside the family. Charles promised he would. The two men shook hands, then the monarch briefly drew him closer, breaking the formality that had surrounded every other conversation. Tom later told Camilla the appeal was over. The queen began to protest, but stopped when she realized he was calmer than she was. "I don't need that trust to know who my family is," he told her. Inside the palace, the conflict finally began to cool. Outside its gates, the judgment was about to become something far louder. By morning, nuance had disappeared. The judgment became a royal earthquake, stripped of legal language and transformed into a public verdict about blood, belonging, and the limits of Camilla's influence. Television panels dissected every sentence. Commentators revived old resentments. Yet one image captured the moment more powerfully than all of them: a newspaper outside Buckingham Palace carrying a single enormous headline declaring that the Queen's son had been shut out. The London Chronicle hit newsstands near Victoria with the words, "Court draws the line. Queen's son has no claim." The fictional front page spread quickly across morning broadcasts, and copies were soon being discussed outside Buckingham Palace. One broadcaster tried to cool the temperature, explaining that the ruling did not punish Tom Parker Bowles personally. Instead, it confirmed a narrower principle: marriage into the royal family does not automatically create inheritance or trust rights for relatives who were never formally included. William watched part of the coverage before his patience broke. The prince asked an aide to turn off the television and said the public story had become crueler than the judgment itself. He understood why the ruling mattered, because private legal arrangements had to remain protected from pressure. But he also knew that Tom was now being treated as a symbol rather than a person. The future king saw the danger immediately. The louder the headlines became, the harder it would be for Camilla to separate legal defeat from public humiliation. Camilla felt that humiliation the moment she saw the headline. The queen stiffened, reached for her phone, and almost called her son. Tom called first. He told her not to issue an angry response, and not to let strangers turn his decision into an attack on her worth. His calm surprised her. He had already accepted something the public still wanted to dramatize into war. The palace changed its approach because of that private decision. After Tom's meeting with Charles, officials rewrote the planned statement so it did not celebrate the legal result. The final wording simply acknowledged the judgment and confirmed that no appeal would be pursued. The trustees also remained silent, reinforcing that their role had been enforcement, not victory. Public debate slowly began to shift. The question was no longer simply who had won. It became whether closeness to the crown should ever be confused with legal entitlement. That distinction now felt unmistakable, even when the person outside the trust was the Queen's own son. The noise finally began to fade, but the family still had one conversation left. The country had chosen its headlines, the lawyers had closed their files, and the trustees had said all they needed to say. Now only Charles, Camilla, and Tom remained, and they would have to decide what the verdict meant beyond the law. The final meaning of the judgment was not found in the courtroom. It came days later, when Camilla sat with Tom and Charles without lawyers, advisors, or royal staff shaping the conversation. The High Court had decided where legal entitlement ended. The family now had to decide whether affection ended there too. For the first time since the ruling, no one argued about clauses, trustees, or appeals. They spoke instead about what could never be written into a trust. Camilla placed the judgment on the table and looked directly at her son. The Queen apologized for allowing her determination to turn his position into a national argument. Tom Parker Bowles did not interrupt. He told her he did not regret asking the legal question, because uncertainty had followed them for too long. But he would not spend years fighting an answer that had now been given clearly. The trust, meaning the private legal arrangement controlling Elizabeth's personal assets and instructions, had drawn its boundary. He was ready to accept it. Charles listened before speaking. The king acknowledged the hardest truth of the entire crisis. His mother had deliberately protected her private trust from expansion through later marriages, and respecting that choice meant accepting limits, even when those limits hurt people he loved. Elizabeth's instructions concerned property that had belonged to her personally, not to the crown as an institution. Overriding them for convenience would have destroyed the very principle he had spent days defending. Camilla finally stopped treating the judgment as a verdict on herself. Tom's exclusion did not erase her marriage to Charles. It did not weaken her place beside him. And it could never remove her son from her private family life. She had lost the legal battle she wanted to win, but she had reached a harder understanding. Becoming queen could not rewrite every boundary created before she held that position. William later supported the decision not to appeal. The prince saw it as proof that family relationships and institutional rules could exist together, without one being manipulated to rescue the other. The trustees then formally closed the disputed file. No application remained. No further challenge would be made. Tom had less legal access than he had hoped for, but he had recovered something more personal control over how the defeat would define him. Charles reached the same final clarity. Loving Camilla did not require him to overturn Elizabeth's wishes. Being king did not prevent him from treating Tom as family beyond those legal limits. The court decided who could enter the trust. The family decided who could remain at the table, and in the end, those proved to be two very different judgments. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.